Hey guys, it's TheFrXion here, Tiger Tank 12, whatever you call me, I don't really care, and welcome back to World of Tanks. It's 2 days since Wargaming did release the patch 1.13 on the North American server and probably on all the World of Tanks servers worldwide. Now this patch was definitely one of the patches that I think most people were afraid of because it brings a lot of changes. High explosive shells, for example, and artillery are and have been overworked with the patch 1.13. So obviously I wanted to talk a little bit about the changes. We're just going to talk real quickly about the arty changes because I'm too frustrated to talk about too much of this, and I just think that my time is better spent with other things than just to talk about artillery, so we're going to keep it short and simple. Artillery has now gotten 3 different types of shells. You have AP shells, you have high explosive shells, and you have stun high explosive shells. The other high explosive shells deal more damage, but they have less splash. So obviously, yeah, those changes are there to make artillery a bit more skill based and to give more options to artillery players. Also, there is now a perk that alerts you if artillery is shooting at you, so you have like 2 seconds to get out of the way. Then there's also the new feature that there are really aggressive, like, what do you call it? There's a line that follows the shot, so you can really see where the shot is coming from. Thus, artillery needs to move more because it's an easy target. If it doesn't, you can always ping it on the map. You can see at the bottom right hand side of the corner, there's like on the minimap, there's a little new circle, and it is actually orange. And that's where artillery fired. So that's one of the things, but artillery hasn't changed too much. What I think is still 3 artilleries absolutely ruin the game, and they still do that. So let's get to the high explosive changes. What you just saw was me knocking out Object 430 that was showing us his tracks and his side. Now remember, the FV215B 183 has a HES shell, which is the premium HES shell that I'm using, with 230 millimeters of pen. How they changed high explosive is that the penetration rate is now like an AP shell. So if you hit a heavily armored spot on the vehicle, you do a lot less damage. Maybe you don't even do damage at all. So what happened is that the splash effect that the high explosive shells used to have, where it would determine which part of the armor was the thinnest and then it would just calculate that as damage, where you got really random rolls sometimes in damage, they want to have it more on a consistent basis. At least that's what Wargaming have said. Now the consistency there is to assure everyone that the armor works and nobody exploits high explosive. I think high explosive was certainly in some areas exploited to the point where it probably was too much, but I don't think that high explosive was exploited for no reason. And I think the main reason, the big elephant in the room that Wargaming have not really addressed at all, and they haven't talked about, is the premium ammunition. They talked about changing all ammo types. Premium ammo hasn't changed at all. Where are those changes? They changed HE. You know what those HE changes will do? In certain scenarios, people will be shooting more gold. People will be using more premium shells. Because all of a sudden, the high explosive shells that used to do damage, even if you hit the target somewhere, it still did damage. It no longer does that. You need to aim for the weak spot. All of a sudden, there are heavy tanks like the Type 5, like the 60TP, like the Maus, the E100, any kind of super heavy armor, super tank destroyers, Yak Panzer U100s, Badgers. If you do not hit a weak spot on that vehicle, you're not going to be doing any damage. Your damage drop-off will be immense. It will be huge. So obviously I have tried to get used to it. What you saw right there previously was actually quite a rare thing. Back in the days that didn't work. I shot through the tracks of the vehicle. That is because high explosive shells now have pen. So if you have the pen, you're actually able to shoot through a track. And if you have enough pen, you can penetrate the vehicle, shoot through the track, which is additional armor, and then be able to hit the vehicle or the chassis behind it. If you have enough pen, you can just pen right through a tank. So, for example, somebody could actually just shoot right through my tracks right here with high explosive, and he would be able to pen me and do massive amounts of damage. What you saw right there was my second penning shot on the Progeno 65. What this means is that if you know the weak spots of vehicles, you have to really aim for those with a high explosive base tank. The KV2, we're gonna look into a gameplay from the KV2 in just a second. First, I want to show you guys what is happening with the FV215B 183. The first thought is you're not going to be losing that one-shotting capability, at least with certain tanks. You're still going to be able to do that. But with other tanks, such as the Tortoise right there, we did 478 damage because we hit like a very heavily armored part of that vehicle. Now, back in the days, we probably would have done about 700 damage because it would have looked for the weakest part of armor. Maybe that part was very heavily armored, maybe would have done like 500 damage, but that's not something that happens a lot in the FV, at least back in the days. Now that has changed drastically, and that means that you have to be really careful in choosing your ammo type, because if you're in a game with a lot of heavy tanks, there's a very high chance that you're not going to be able to do a lot of damage to these vehicles because, well, your high explosive shells are just not as reliable against armor as they used to be, because it doesn't look for the weakest part. And heavy tanks, what do heavy tanks have that other vehicles don't? They have armor, so you're not going to be able to do the same amount of damage. Thus, it is indirect, a massive buff to all kinds of heavy tanks. Object 279E, IS-7, IS-4, 60TP, all that kind of stuff. Every vehicle with a lot of armor now has all of a sudden a really weird kind of advantage. So right there is a 60TP, so you can see what is going to be happening in just a second. So we spot him, we should respawn him right again, and I fire a high explosive shell. Look at how I'm trying to aim. I want to shoot the lower glaciers because I know if I have 230 millimeters of pen, maybe I'll be able to actually go through the lower plate and do damage. So I would be able to maybe pen him. That's the only spot where I can really reliably shoot him and do like a certain amount of damage, because his armor right there is not as thick as on other parts of the vehicle. Now the top of the tank, I think with the 60TP, that's quite heavily armored now, so it's going to be really awkward. If I shoot the gun mantlet, which is basically the heaviest armored part of the tank, we would actually bounce and we will not do any damage. So there are certain situations, and we will get into that in just a second, where I'm going to show you two gameplays in my KV2s, and we're going to go through them real quickly, where there are instances how high explosives all of a sudden now has a different kind of role. So we fire, we hit the upper plate, we do damage because of the high caliber that we have and the amount of pen that we still have. That kind of correlates with the armor thickness, and it's something that plays together. And I decided to use a AP shell because in this scenario, being able to pen the 60TP is probably more valuable to me than being able to, hopefully pen him with a high explosive HESH shell. And we actually do that. We pen him with an AP shell of 1,331 damage, and we get taken out. And you can see what happened right there. So we still managed to do 6,000 damage, but that's not the main point. The thing is, high explosive still works, but it works a bit different now. And that's something we have to get used to, because I don't think Wargaming are going to be taking this out of the game anytime soon. What that means is very weakly armored vehicles now, if you do calculate it correctly, like for example, you have a CDC right in front of you, and you have about 50-60 millimeters of penetration on your high explosive shell, you can now just shoot the thing from the side, go through the tracks, and destroy the thing, pen it, the armor, and it's basically worthless. Every other vehicle that is very heavily armored, which, if you think about, is basically every single Russian vehicle in this game, they get a massive buff. Now, if these tanks if they have high explosive shells that have high pen, for example, the Type 5, now all of the sudden you have a really disgusting kind of thing, a scenario where the Type 5 now can do massive amounts of damage to lightly armored vehicles in a hull down position, or in like against vehicles that aren't as heavily armored as the Type 5, and it cannot really be hurt by high explosive shells because that thing has so much armor. So all of a sudden you have to rely on premium shells, because why would you fire high explosive shells at tanks that are in a hull down position where you previously would have done maybe 200 or 300 damage, which still would be better than nothing. But yeah, I'm winding myself up. This is only the beginning, and we have to get used to it. So let's jump on over to the next two gameplays, and we're going to talk about the changes with the KB2, because that's another vehicle that I played immediately after the changes. Okay, the second game is in the KB2, as I mentioned previously, and we are playing against some tier 6 vehicles and some tier 7 vehicles. So this is a normal setup that you have going when you're playing the KB2. I'm gonna skip ahead real fast so we can get to the point that is really important for this video, and we can talk about the changes. So we drive to the heavy position that you usually do in a heavy tank, and now we get into a position where we actually can do something. So right there is a VK. Keep in mind, we're going to check the high explosive values on the KB2. The high explosive shells on the KB2, hello, could you please tell me? Either way, it's 86 millimeters of pen. So that VK on the side probably doesn't have that armor. We one-shot him, everything is as it used to be. So that's good, like that's reliable, it's basically how it's supposed to be. High explosive shell penned the vehicle, it destroyed the vehicle, and now it's the next target. Chiri, that thing has 75 millimeters of frontal armor. Now if we do put one into the Chiri, usually it will actually kill the vehicle or do a lot of damage. So let's hope that we actually pen, we shoot him, we hit the side of his turret, we pen him, we do 835. So that's all nice and good at this moment in time. So if you would have thought about like what would have happened right there if the old high explosive shell type would be in the game, well, it would have looked for the weakest part of the armor. So let's imagine I hit that vehicle right there, but since we actually had enough pen, I think we would have still penned the vehicle and done the same amount of damage. But if that vehicle right there had enough armor to withhold the high explosive shell, what ended up would is that there would have been a circle where it would look for the armor that is below the vehicle and look for the weakest part of that armor, and probably we would have done, let's say, like the max amount of damage without penning, and that would have been maybe 400 or 500 damage. And that's what a lot of people were upset about, I think. Premium players, and not just them, I think also people that played like super heavy tanks, right? That the high explosive shells kind of took away the skill. But how can there be skill if there is no weak spot on top of your vehicle? That's kind of the issue right there. The issue is they have taken out all of the weak spots in this game, and they have given us nothing back. So right there, we have a Chiri right in front of us. And I mean, look at the bloom of this. We don't have the free camera mod. Look at the bloom on this thing. So we fire and we actually bounce the Chiri. Now keep in mind, the Chiri is a tank that has 75 millimeters of frontal armor. What we ended up hitting is actually the track. If you hit the track and you hit the side of it, it's like an AP shell. It will not do any damage because it will not explode towards the tank. The shrapnel from outside will not do any damage to the Chiri. Artillery, on the other hand, still has the old high explosive mechanic. So if artillery hits you somewhere, it will still look for the weakest part of the armor. So we bounced the Chiri. That's something that would have never happened back in the days, because hitting a Chiri, just splashing him with 48 damage, that is extremely frustrating. All of a sudden, the consistency that Wargaming have talked about is like really disgusting, because this consistency didn't allow me to kill the Chiri. The consistency right there told me that my high explosive shell, which is supposed to be a high explosive shell that is exploding on the outside, didn't do any damage because we hit the tracks. Okay, fair play, you know what? Let's move on. There's the Chiri again. He wants to come back for another round, and I bounce again. What the hell is going on right now? So if it turns out I actually shot the Chiri on his gun mantlet, and the gun mantlet is so thick that it just absorbed that high explosive shell. And it exploded all over the tank, and it didn't do a single hit of damage. So we are now in a really awkward position where we have fired 2 shots, both of them bounced on a Chiri. Now imagine that. So, like, what are you supposed to think about that? Like, the consistency that they're talking about all of the sudden doesn't allow me to do damage anymore, and we're in a really awkward position now because I am no longer trusting my high explosive shells. Back in the days, I don't care. I want to do damage, so I want to do a little bit of damage. Fair play, I do a bit of damage. I hit the guy, I do maybe 300-400 damage. Next shot, I do 150 or 200. Okay, it's all fair, but at least I know I'm going to be doing damage. So, obviously right there we get taken out, but that's really frustrating. So we're going to move on to the next gameplay, and we're going to talk about how the high explosive changes work and how they're supposed to be working in a perfect scenario. I promise this is the last game that we're going to talk about the high explosive changes. I'm quite a bit frustrated. I'm annoyed. These changes, they will have, they will take a lot of time to adjust, or at least for the players to adjust to these changes. And I'm not a big fan of the high explosive changes. I don't really care about the arty changes because I don't think that the artillery has gotten better at all. I still have seen like massive rolls on artillery with the new shells, and yes, I'm absolutely I have no faith in wargaming. I haven't had any faith in wargaming for at least 2-3 years now, after all of the shit that they've pulled, and they just don't care. They don't care about the feedback. They don't care about any of the ideas that we bring to the table. They don't give a fuck about the players. They only want your money. And if that gives them any kind of satisfaction, I think a lot of people will be jumping ship. A lot of people will stop playing World of Tanks, and I can see why. This has the potential to be a max exodus for World of Tanks, and I just don't have a lot of fun playing a game where everything is so pretty crazy imbalanced. Like, tier 10 is an absolute mess. There's going to be some gameplay from tier 10 like in my mouse, and we're going to be talking about that in another video. But now let's take a look at how high explosive works, if it really works. So we're in a KV2 and we spot a KV2, and he's probably going to be going to the corner. But we know that there is another KV2 coming in, and all of a sudden KV2 appears, he drives past us, and we manage to pen him. Now, the pen that we have is 86 millimeters, and I'm not sure what the armor on the side of the KV2 is, but it's not 86 millimeters thick. So we pen the vehicle, we do full damage, and we knock him out of the game. It went right through the tracks, it penetrated the tracks, and now we try the same with the gun, and we actually bounce off the screen, which is the gun mantlet. So that's how weird this change is, because we cannot really do any damage to him frontally on the turret, because the turret is probably thicker than 86 millimeters, or at most of the parts. And the gun mantlet, which is so big on this tank, will be catching a lot of the flak. So we got lucky, we bounced an AP shell from the KV2. I don't really know why you were playing a KV2 with AP shells, but that's maybe something we'll be seeing more of, because I at least expected some damage right there. So you cannot be expecting the damage anymore. So right now we have the side turret of the KV2, we do another 960 damage, and we roll high once again, and we destroy another KV2 with a single shot. So that's how Wargaming want us to play high explosive. So right there we have the shot, we're able to do the damage. And that is really weird, because if I actually hit any other part, like the tracks or something like that, we're not going to be doing any damage. And that's just really weird. That's a notion that you have to get used to. So there's a talk to. He's 325 HP, alive right there on the corner. But I want to take out the Chaffee. Look at that. Our KV2 right there next to us hit the tracks of the Chaffee. He didn't do a single HP worth of damage. That just feels completely wrong in the terms of a high explosive shell. So right there, obviously the Chaffee is sitting like still for us. We're reloading, and we're going to be putting one into him in just a second. And this is how it is supposed to be going. So we pen him, we do 550 damage, and I think that's game as well, where we win very, very easily, get 3 kills, and where high explosive hasn't really fucked us over at all. But it's really weird. I think that there are certain tanks that will benefit from this change extremely. Like, there are tanks that will be benefiting from these changes like so much. Every heavy tank will be benefiting from these changes, and I'm not really sure. I don't know how it's going to be going in the near future, but there are a lot of things broken and amiss with this game, and I just don't think that it's going to be fixed at all in the end. But yeah, we'll have to see. I think a lot of people are upset, a lot of people are frustrated, and it could be the final nail in the coffin for quite a few players. So, Wargaming, what is your next move? There are things that I have not forgotten about. Tank rewards. What about the tank rewards? You took them out of the game about 8 months ago. I think somewhere around October or November, they took away the tank rewards. They said they would reintroduce it into the game in 2021 to rework it. Something about that just didn't seem right. We are now in the second quarter of 2021. We are half time of the year 2021. So, where is tank rewards? What do you need to rework? Are you just, like, was it too much to give out a free tier 6 premium every month or so? By just playing the game? Did you want to have that extra money? Like, are you that desperate? I don't really know anymore. I have lost faith in this company over and over again, and they will not be seeing a single cent coming from me anymore. But the thing is, obviously, I've already spent so much money on it, so they will probably tell you, like, well, we don't give a fuck. He already spent, like, more than enough money on us, so good riddance. But yeah, this game is going down the shitter, step by step. And it breaks me, like, it hurts to see this game going down like that. Because I still think that this game deserves better. But yeah, that's where we are now, and we cannot fix it. This is Wargaming's doing, and I have no regret, and I have no remorse, and I have no guilt, no feeling of guilt when this shit show will collapse. Because I don't think it's a matter of if it's going to be collapsing. I just think it's a matter of time. The other projects that Wargaming have, they have destroyed as well. What kind of projects do they have? They have World of Warplanes that failed grandiosely. Like, it just it collapsed, like, really quickly because it just didn't have, like, there was competition there. Like, War Thunder, it may not be the perfect game either, but War Thunder was competition, and it just wrecked World of Warplanes. No chance there. World of Warships, that's the other thing that's quite successful, but it's the same bullshit. Premium ships, a lot of bullshit around, like, trying to fuck players over with their marketing practices and their monetization schemes. And now what are they doing? They're making a free-to-play third-person shooter. That's going to be failing as well, because it's going to be living through the same kind of garbage. Like, this company is so driven on profits that it's so disgusting. But either way, that's enough ranting. Hope you have a good day. Take your time, take your time. Maybe take some time off World of Tanks if you really hate the high explosive changes. I am definitely doing that. And I hope I see you guys on the next video. Until then, have a good one.